Dr. Chomsky, I would like to thank you for your extraordinary efforts your extraordinary success at documenting Western atrocities in the developing world. Whenever I run into a fascist I just can't argue with, I leave them with a couple of the titles of your book, and more than a few of them have been changed, I think. But the question I'd like to ask you about is, if you accept the premise, as I do, that the major media outlets in the developing world and the developed world are under centralized business control, and that these media businesses go to government press conferences for their information first, then it's easy to come to a logical conclusion that the national security powers in various nations are, in fact, have strategic control of the media outlets. My question is, do you view that a progressive revolutionary movement must regain control of these media outlets in order to be successful, or do you think that that somehow there is an alternative system of propaganda that can allow a major break with the ruling elites? As a secondary, are you familiar with any active CIA personnel in Western media institutions currently?
I mean, I probably am, but I'm not consciously familiar with them. I mean, I don't know that such and such a person is working for the CIA. It wouldn't surprise me. I mean, there are people who say they have worked with the CIA, like Stanley Carno, who said that it's part of a journalist's job. He published the fact that it's part of a journalist's job to be in friendly relations with the CIA. Okay, so he probably is, but I don't know myself. I wouldn't know that kind of thing. As to the first point, I mean, I don't think it's kind of a chicken and egg thing. I mean, it seems to me, you want to democratize the society, you want to democratize the media, and the two things go together, and you do what you can. I mean, one shouldn't feel that the system is all powerful. It's very far from that. I mean, it's always breaking down, because of stupidity, because of impossibility of controlling, all sorts of reasons. And the more there's popular pressures and organization and so on, the more systems of power, they always have to adjust to them somehow. And there's plenty of opportunities inside the institutions. I mean, they're very good journalists who understand the whole thing perfectly. They understand how it works. They use the system wherever you can use it. And they do very good things. They get things through that you wouldn't see otherwise. And things can be done, they can do more if they have outside support. So there's lots of things that can be done inside. There's lots of things that can be done in developing popular organization and pressures and so on. And one end result of this should be general democratization of social institutions, including the media. And I don't think these things are not, institutions aren't fixed for all time. They keep changing, and they change because of popular pressures and struggle. Oh, look, take, say, freedom of the press. That's a very important thing. We have more of it than we had in the past. In fact, until about the First World War, freedom of press barely existed in the United States. That's literally true. Seditious libel, which I mentioned before, that actually wasn't struck down by the Supreme Court until 1964. It's almost 200 years before we got rid of the thing which makes it just not a free society. Now, all of this happened because of popular struggle. It was because of labor movement and civil rights movement and so on. That led to freedom of the press to the extent that we've got it, and it's an important achievement. And, it's by no means the end. Formal freedom of the press helps things, but it doesn't end things. And there's no end. There's always going to be new forms of authority and domination that you hadn't even noticed before that you're going to want to overcome and eliminate. That's life. As long as human life goes on, that's going to be the case. We can see the ones now that are oppressive and coercive, and we try to get rid of them. We get rid of them, we're going to find new ones that are being noticed. We get rid of them. And it takes constant work. Over time, there's, after all, some slow progress. It's not. I mean, it's not very long ago that human slavery was considered completely legitimate. In fact, essential. Now it sounds outlandish. Well, that's progress. And the progress came through struggle, not by anything else.
Professor Chomsky, you've mentioned a couple of times a phrase called the discipline of media here in this country. And I was wondering, one, if you could give us a couple of examples of that.
Media discipline?
Yes. how it happens, structurally. I mean, who's doing it? How do they do it? 2, why don't we ever see you on talk shows like Nightline and 60 Minutes? And if there's time, I'd also like you to comment on the significance of the U.S. opening negotiations with the PLO. If you could do that.
Yeah, I just gave a long talk about that one last night. I think I'm going to beg off the third one because it's a big topic. I don't think it's very significant. My feeling is it's a delaying action to give Israel about a year or so to crush the uprising. That's exactly the way Israel sees it. The Israeli Defense Ministry sees it that way, and I think it's exactly what happened. That's a big story in itself. If you're interested, I have a long, detailed analysis of this in the March issue of Z Magazine, which tells you what I think about it. On the first question, I guess I didn't quite understand it. I thought I was trying to give examples to show what the media does. As to the mechanisms, are you asking about the mechanism? Well, the mechanisms are basically 2, as I see it, and it's the same in academic scholarship, incidentally. The main mechanism is that people just internalize the values. You don't even make it into these systems unless you've already accepted their values. They weed you out along the way. That's a process that starts in kindergarten, where people are trained for obedience, and they're trained for conformity, and it goes all the way through. And the people who aren't obedient end up being discipline problems or taxi drivers or something or other. And the ones who make it through are, by and large, disciplined. They've already internalized the values, otherwise they can't make it. Now, there are people who escape, and that's why you get noise in the system. That's very valuable. The other thing that happens, some of the people who escape understand what's going on and do what they can. And if they pursue the kind of story that's unacceptable to the editors, and the editors are just part of the privileged class that shares power in other institutions, they hear about it. Their editor will come back and say, you're irresponsible, or you're looking at the wrong story. Why don't you take a month off and work on the Metro beat? Go to the police court or something. That'll clear up your mind. And there's all kinds of ways of getting people back on the right course. Or the government will come after them with, I was hearing some stories today from some journalists about how the Office of Public Diplomacy leaked lies about journalists who were reporting stuff that they didn't want to hear, and that's hard to live with, pretty hard to live with in a competitive, difficult world like journalism. So there are all kind of mechanisms by which it happens, and people just learn, either you get out or you somehow learn to live with it, and you can do things within it, and there are people who do it very successfully. As to things like, say, Nightline and so on, let me just tell you a story. The other day, a couple of weeks ago, I was in Madison, Wisconsin. Somebody here was there, and I was interviewed by a talk show, community-supported, listener-supported radio station. It's a good station. And the guy, the news editor, I've been on it a lot, but when I'm there or by phone or something, so I was on there for a while. And he started off the interview. He said this is a very enterprising guy. He interviews a lot of mainstream media people. And he had just interviewed a couple of weeks ago somebody from Nightline. I think his name is Jeff Greenfield, if that's the right name. Somebody who's like a producer or something from Nightline. And he played on the radio, again, the tape of that interview, which he had already played on the radio. And he played it for me, and he wanted me to comment on it. And he asked Greenfield, if that's his name, why, just your question, why am I never on Nightline? And Greenfield started off by, kind of foaming at the mouth for a while about how this guy is wacko. He said he's from Neptune, we got to keep some standards, After the tantrum subsided, he made a comment which was in fact quite to the point. He said, it went roughly like this. He said, look, there may be some guy in Turkey who knows all about, I don't know what, the INF treaty or something, but only talks Turkish. And that's just no use to us. We've got to have somebody who can talk English. Now, he says, what we need is concision. What we need is somebody who can meet this requirement of concision. And then he said, you got to say what you have to say in a few short sentences, without wasting time and so on. And as you've heard this evening, I'm not very good at that. He was right about that. And Greenfield was pointing to something about the American media which is quite significant and is different from the media in any other country I know of, Western Europe or Canada or anything else. The American media, to my knowledge, uniquely require that you have concision. That is, that if you ever do get on the media, say Nightline or anything else, you get like a couple of sentences in between two commercials or something like that. Or you get on the op-ed page, you get 600 words or something. And that's very important. That means that, see, through that filter, only certain things can pass. You can always say conventional things. Like suppose I'm on Nightline and they say, what do you think we ought to do about terrorism? And I say, well, you know, Gaddafi's a mad dog. We ought to blockade Libya or something or other. I can say that under the condition of concision. Suppose, however, my answer is, well, George Shultz is one of the major terrorists in the world, and there are things we can do about that. We should do this, that, and the other thing. Well, under the condition of concision, I'm saying something which sounds outlandish. I mean, when people hear that, they have a right to ask what you mean. I never heard that before. I mean, I know Gaddafi's a terrorist. I hear it every day. But what do you mean when you say George Shultz is a terrorist? Well, the